everyone. Love the change of scenery. Trying not to stare at the mannequin that's in the corner of the room. Freaking me out.
Me too.
So if I do this during the meeting, it's nothing personal. So tonight's a big night, June 30th, with the obvious goal of can this group get through the Articles of Agreement and get to a point where we're ready to call a vote to recommend the creation of a unified school district for Essex Junction, Essex Town, and Westford. We've got, I think some issues that have persisted for the last couple of meetings that hopefully we can get through tonight. I know that it's a tall order, but I don't think it's impossible for us to get through these issues and to come to a point where we reach an agreement that maybe isn't perfect in each and every one of our individual minds or perspectives, but is something that you can live with as a member of this committee. The individual check-ins that I did with each of you was very helpful for me to understand where you were and some of the things that were still kind of on your mind as we are cruising down the home stretch here. So once again, we will be aided in this work by Brian and Chris, and we've got some language that we shared with you via email last night. There's been, I think, some additional changes that we'll be able to discuss tonight. So I guess my suggestion or hope is that everyone can be thinking about the clock tonight as we discuss these issues, and hopefully we can find a way to get to a point where we can call a formal vote on this question tonight and start thinking about phase 2, not to presume the outcome, but I want to just thank everybody for the incredible amount of work that you've all put into this process. It's been a lot of hours sitting around this table or a table and getting to know each other and representing the concerns of our communities and our neighbors and our friends as we have dealt with really complex and complicated questions. This is not an easy thing. So I applaud each and every one of you for the time, the dedication, the thoughtfulness that you've approached this work with is commendable, and I want to just thank you very much for that. I was going to give you a communications update, which is one of the first items on our agenda tonight, but the communications task force met last night, and we're waiting on you, basically. So we really can't plan the next round of communication unless we know what the will of the committee is. So we did look at the survey results. There have been more responses since the last time we met. I think over 650 responses now, which is amazing. We also drafted some language so that if there is a positive vote tonight, we can begin to communicate that, especially to the media, who has a high level of interest in this project all of a sudden. But really the work of phase 2, as I've been calling it, the communication work, that really is dependent on the outcome of tonight and whether or not we have a charge to move forward and begin having the conversation with the broader community about what this recommendation represents. So, do I have a motion to approve the minutes of June 25th?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second it, but I have a change.
Okay, great.
I don't believe Kim was here last week. I didn't have her written down in my notes. So she needs to go under absent
Okay.
on line 12 and deleted from line 9.
Ben, can you get that? Great.
But we missed you.
She was at the communication task force meeting.
I was.
Any other changes or revisions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes passed. Thank you. Great. So with that, I think I've done the communications piece already, so I'm going to turn it over to Brian, who will walk us through the next steps of the article.
So what I just passed out was this document to just simply acknowledge those articles that have gotten tentative approval and those articles that are still outstanding. And in talking with Brendan as we were prepping for tonight, the thinking was to focus our attention on the outstanding articles and just go through them as briefly or as lengthily as needs to be done. What I did do in further conversation with Chris and from some additional feedback, there were some additional minor edits from what got sent out last night in this document. So I'm gonna give you the same document with those minor edits, so you have kind of compatible pieces to it. And I didn't want to keep it from people in terms of if you had done your own hand scratching on those and made your own notes. So essentially, it's the same document, and anything that has been changed on that has been highlighted with bold and underlined. Keely?
I have a question about the wording of one of the articles that has tentative approval. It's one that we didn't rediscuss last week. When would be an appropriate
Number
time to
2?
discuss that? Number 6.
All right, we'll just move it over there.
Thanks.
Yes. So opening paragraph. And I'm gonna operate that, there's not a need for me to read each of these articles verbatim tonight, given your now in-depth familiarity with these. So the article is, what this initial paragraph speaks to it is the district being named the Essex Westford Community School District. My thinking here was questions, comments, whether you like it, want to move on. Keely.
Is there a reason why we're choosing a name that has to be adjustable rather than one that is neutral to the towns that join it, like Chittenden Central or Bob Hope?
I only went with that because that was the language that was there from the prior document, and it seemed to be the simplest in terms of, you've got Essex and Westford. If people want to do something differently, I think that can be done. I'll defer to Chris if you want to do a different response to that.
No, I have my same response. One draft I had it as the Ira Allen School District.
He had Ira Allen. I said, well, maybe we might not want to make suggestions. Mitch?
Two problems. But so we're only giving Westford 1 vote out of 10 on the committee, but we're giving them half the name.
Well, we haven't gotten to that name, so, but we have gotten to the name of the district.
And the second problem is, we might have to change it if the vote doesn't go the way it is, and that just
Right.
complicates
And that
things.
will be included.
So
in
let's
the
change it
language.
to something neutral so we don't have this hassle.
Brian?
I believe in the same thing. I was gonna suggest the Alderbrook.
School district?
Yeah, it's a one contiguous geographical feature that flows between Westford and Essex.
It's in Westford.
So is Browns River.
It's
It
about-
does, but Browns River seem to be taken, so.
Does Alderbrook continue to the junction?
I looked at that. We could take cups of water from there.
So I just think of it as a
There's the
dentist.
next
We're happy to
meeting.
share.
So that's what I was looking at. It was a neutral name, but I like that line of thinking rather than calling it that. Chittenden Central is there, but there might be that sense of assumption rather than new beginning.
My initial thought was I liked the fact that the communities were named because I felt more inclusive. But I also see the efficiency of having something a little more general.
Linda?
Is it possible that we use this name for our convenience, and then if the merger, and tell people, when the merger goes through, we can have a contest in all the schools to name the district, or something like that? This name doesn't have to stay.
Linda, I'm feeling pretty good that I was thinking somewhat similar to you. To me, I think you may be more challenged to find the right name, as Brian is suggesting, and that this could be a bit of a holding place for the moment, and that part of the board's responsibility or a consideration that is a recommendation in the preamble is that the community gets involved with the naming of the school district if you want to go something different.
But that should be in the
That's
articles
right.
then. That's not a final name, because otherwise people will get the wrong impression.
Right, and I would suggest, Mitch, that not be in the articles, but it be in the preamble with the explanation. Because I think you can get very wordy with the articles, that's just a suggestion.
But
Marla?
I thought Article 1 and 2 were the only ones our public gets to vote on. And I would feel bad if the name in Article 1 isn't the name we're gonna go with. Isn't that misleading to, I mean,
Well,
it's
it would be the name
confusing.
that you would go with, but after the board has been elected, the board could move in a direction where it wanted to at least consider with the community the changing of the name. It would be an after the fact, once that board
So
would be
we
elected.
can change it afterwards?
So Marla, I just want to clarify that the Articles 1 and 2 that the voters vote on are different than the articles in the Articles of Agreement. State statute labels them as Articles 1 and Articles 2, but it's a combination of the various articles in the Articles of Agreement.
Okay.
Can I get a sense of whether or not, if we called the district, even if it was a temporary thing, the Chittenden Central Unified Union School District, would people generally, and even if we used it as a holding pattern, is that a?
Why do we have unified union? It's like
'Cause that's
repeating
what it-
itself. Why not just
That's what we're
Chittenden Central
suggesting.
School District?
Well, because that's what we're suggesting that we're forming, is a unified union.
That's the legal
The
description.
legal name of the. Yes.
The reason I don't particularly like that is we already have Chittenden South, we already have Chittenden East, and I think it gets confusing to people, especially when you start using the initials and they're similar. I think, personally, I think if we had wanted to change this, we should have done it before tonight. I think it would be smart to just go with this for now and look to the new board to create a process to name the district, if they wanted to do so.
Other thoughts?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm gonna speak in favor of staying with the Essex Westward, because of the sensitivity about communities losing their sense of themselves. And I don't think we as a committee should participate in erasing them anymore. And maybe later the names can be changed.
That's a very good point.
Marla?
My argument to that is for numerous years when the village and town have talked merger, calling it Essex only is a sticky point to the Junction residents. So that's why I think the name needs to be more general, because I think it's a problem if Westford's in there and then they're not part of it, and I think Essex, I think we touch off the same arguments that happened years ago. We're right down in the same road.
If we went with this for tonight and for what we take to the state board, could we potentially in the interim have a group of people work on some different suggestions? And this is a question I have not just about this, but as a result of our community engagement, if we see some things we want to change, can we take them back to the state board before the vote?
I can respond to that, but I think Chris would be better. My sense would be is you can take the articles back to the state board for approval. I think the issue would be is what's the status of that relative to what has been the warned set of articles? And
Well,
the
I don't
articles
think you
that-
could do it after October 3rd or
Yeah.
whenever.
So I think you can do it. You need to draw a line. So for example, Brian and I were talking just before the meeting began about whether or not you can we can take these articles and a couple of us have a meeting with folks at the Agency of Education and get some immediate feedback from them on the articles. They're not going to be going to the state board. I mean, don't think that you can get them to review these prior to August. I think it's problematic if you show up at the August meeting with changes to the articles. I mean, I tell you that I think August 1 is really the cutoff for this group to make revisions to the articles unless they're revisions that are suggested by the Agency of Education. You know, the timeline's a little different if you're voting in in March as opposed to November, but you really want to be in a position where by the middle of September, you can be drafting warnings for each of the communities, and the town clerks can be preparing ballots and doing the things that they need to do, as well as letting voters know that if they're interested in being on the board of directors, they need to start circulating petitions.
I guess for me, that raises the question of whether or not November is the right date for the vote. It seems like it might be a really compressed timeline. I mean, if we chose March or April, if that would give not only an opportunity to maybe make some changes, but also more time for candidates to get their act together and actually run for the new board.
And more time for community engagement prior to the vote. I feel like our timeline for community engagement, when there's any hope of their input having any effect on what we might do, is so compressed with this November 3rd date.
Sometimes that's better than dragging it out too.
Yeah?
I really feel like we should skip over this for now or come back to it later, but right now we're wasting time going through the actual meat of the articles, and if we're going to play around with the name all night, I think it's a really big waste of a lot of people's time. I mean, we can tell people that we're going to change the name later, or they can change the name later when we speak to the public, but if we don't even get to that point, all this is moot.
Yep.
And I agree with you on that one, but just a really quick thought, could we just eliminate Essex Westford and just have it as Community Unified Union School District and just leave it as that and say, again, some name would be changed? Then that would take all the, I don't know, if there's any doubt.
Northern Vermont Community District.
Just call it Community Unified Union.
Vermont's
School
finest.
Whatever.
You know what? Let's move on to the next one. This is a bad one, right? Let's move on to the next one, and we'll come back to this, and we'll see where we are later in the meeting. But let's move on to the next one.
Okay, so the next article, Article 1, deals with the necessary and advisable districts. The language is in there as necessary. Chris can speak to there. This is legal language from the statute because of why we're using the terms necessary and advisable. And Essex Town and Essex Junction are necessary, primarily due to the Union High School. The union doesn't happen without Essex Junction and Essex Town agreeing to that. It can happen without Westford. Westford does not have to be part of that. So we've been through this, I think, a bit. So again, open for comments, questions, and see what people's thoughts are. Mitch?
It's okay, but I see in Article 19, shouldn't we just put 19 and 20 in with Article 1 because they talk about the same things?
It could be. We were intentional in putting it at the end.
And why would you do that?
Well, go ahead.
I do it for two reasons. It was done for two reasons. The first is that the committee asked for an article similar to what Chittenden East had relative to a district being able to come back in. It was a separate article in Chittenden East. I think it is a separate issue than who is or is not an advisable district, so I think it ought to be in a separate article. Article 20 essentially was, that issue was placed in Article 20 so that it really doesn't set as negative a tone in Article 1, so that you're not immediately focusing on the negative in
And
Article
what do
1.
the voters actually see? You said they see 1 and 2, but not the 1 and 2 we're seeing. I'm confused by that.
So first, they see everything. They have access to the full report. It's legal requirement that it's filed in the town clerk's office. When they go to vote, the article that they vote on will include portions of Article 1 that's in the agreement, It would include portions of Article 2 that's in the agreement. It would not include Article 3. It would include a portion of Article 8 and Article 7. It would include portions of Articles 9 and 10. That's essentially it.
Shouldn't we be able to see that ahead of time, to see what we're signing off on? It seemed like we have, well, here's the full story, but here's the abridged story, and is the abridged story really telling the story? That's what I'm concerned about. What are the people that are voting on this gonna really see? What are we communicating to them?
So state statute specifies what they see. It's not a question really of you're seeing an abridged version of it or they're seeing an abridged version of it. State statute specifies what the voters see on the ballot, and then it also specifies that a copy of the report is filed in each of the town clerk's office and is available for the voters to read and review.
What percentage of the voters actually will read that?
So I can't talk about this community, but I can talk about other communities that have voted on it, and I think people's access to the report and review and discussion of the report has been very high in other districts where it's been voted on.
And I would also say, Mitch, that these articles are gonna be really what frames the conversation for you with all your public engagement forums. That's what's gonna be your starting point. And the clarity of the warning will be presented at the same time, but all it does is restate what are elements of these articles of agreement. So these drive what the formal warning is, but the warning is driven by statutory language, if that helps.
The only other thing I'd say is the warning is really the purview of the districts voting on it, their boards of school directors, not the study committee.
Any other comments?
Keely.
This wasn't on the same issue, it's a different part of Article 2. On the question of necessary and advisable, last time we had a big conversation about making all three advisable so that Westford felt equally included as the other two. And obviously that's not legally an option, but I still would like to mention that maybe we should consider making them necessary. My reasons for thinking so is because we've spent a lot of time looking at this issue, thinking about how to incorporate all three. We really think it's in the best interest of everybody. And in order to get the full incentives, we actually do need Westford, and that's a third of the tax incentive that we'll lose. Or thinking about we increase our tax incentive by half by getting Westford involved. If calling them advisable and us necessary makes them extremely likely to vote no, obviously, like, I think in general we should focus on this as we're gonna mobilize the people who wanna say yes. If we think this is a good idea, and we can't possibly worry about every reason people would think no, but I just wanted to put that back on the table. Thoughts on that?
I disagree because Essex Junction and Essex Town, if they're all necessary, if Westford is included as necessary and they vote no, then Essex Junction and Essex Town do not get the benefit of at least being a rep. And I feel that the voters of Essex Junction and Essex Town would at least like to get that in the
I guess my, sort of stepping on my chair roll for a minute, my opinion on this issue is that I feel like we've made an accommodation. So first off, I think that the language is unfortunate, right? It's very technical language. I think it probably could be addressed a little bit in the preamble, that obviously the intention of this committee is that we want all three of the communities to be part of this. But I think that we provide a little bit of an escape hatch maybe, so I'm not sure if that's the right phrase, but by allowing the community of Westford to have a second chance to consider this question.
Will that be within the time frame to receive the Act 46 incentives?
Yes.
Yes.
So
Even if we move our vote to March?
you might have to think about that, but I think so. I think that would still work. So in my mind, it was a way to to still, give Essex Junction and Essex Town the opportunity to get something out of this process if Westford votes no. But it also gives Westford an opportunity to maybe have a second bite at the apple if they vote no and then want to have another conversation. So in my mind, it was a compromise of as long as I could see that article, I was fine with the advisable and necessary. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, I don't have a change on that, I just think that you're absolutely right. That is the best possible way to get the action taken and then another action. If it works, it works. In the meantime, you've gone by, you move it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a flexible, kind of a flexible option for. Yes.
I also think, Keely, that just the fact that we have compromised for grandfathering high school students in Westford till 2020 sends a statement that in itself, besides the other things we've talked about, I think it says we want to include you. And then that necessary versus advisable, the legal wording is unfortunate, but it seems to be the way we have to go in order to get any part of the red. We want at least the red to be formed.
If we went fully free 46, we could legally call it necessary. Sorry, maybe 46, Act 46, but.
And the only other thing I would add is that some of the thinking on this, and knowing that we did not confirm in any of these discussions the vote date, the discussions that we had, given some of the timing issues, and understanding it's a relatively ambitious schedule, might be an understatement, but that if you do go with Westford as advisable, it does give Westford that opportunity within a reasonable period to still create the eligibility for all of the districts or all of the communities to be able to take advantage of Act 46 and the 5-year incentive, because it would allow Westford to have a second payment if wanted before that June 30th, 2016 date. So that was also part of the thinking. So if there's no more discussion on that topic, for the benefit of maybe just moving forward and seeing where we're at, can I get a thumbs up in favor of the article as written with necessary and advisable? Okay, moving on. And I have Article 3 down there, and I would just call attention to Article 2 in the document that I passed out, is that there was an additional adjustment to the language that simply took as tuition students from the Union District and moved it to another part of that same sentence. So there's nothing substantive in terms of difference there, and that had been given tentative approval. Okay? If people are good with that, I'll go to number 3. And this deals with the recognition of employees and processing for collective bargaining agreements. And there were some modifications made to this with some of the legal references from our meeting 2 weeks ago. Nothing different than that, and that had gotten tentative approval. Rachel.
The question, and I know that Kim had this question about what happens if Lehigh is not in existence for the collective bargaining for the 2017-18 school year. And does that need to be referenced in here in some way?
We've talked about this, and I'll turn this over to Chris in a moment, but Lehigh is the Vermont health insurance, education health insurance. Almost all of the school districts in the state are part of an insurance trust, which has then become a partnership between the Vermont Education Association and the Vermont School Boards Association. And because of the Affordable Health Care Act, there are changes coming with what are health insurance programs that can be offered by this Lehigh entity. And I'm going to let Chris speak a little bit about that. We do not see that as an issue because everybody's going to be in the same boat. And there will be some requirements to be legally compliant with the Affordable Health Care Act, as well as there would have to be respect for what are existing conditions if they do not violate some of the law around that.
So just very quickly, if the new district's formed, in November. There'll be an organizational meeting in late December or early January, where the district will decide when its organizational meeting's going to, the annual meeting's going to be held. They'll elect some officers of the district, and the elected school board members will be sworn in and will actually begin their duties as of that date. Within 60 days of that date, the district is obligated, the board's obligated to commence negotiations with the association of the various associations, the support staff associations, the two teachers associations. That board will have more time to negotiate that new contract and contracts, the ESP and the teacher contracts, than school districts presently have if they weren't forming a union. So one, I think on a practical level, the time's there to negotiate a new agreement more than districts typically have, substantially more than districts typically have. That's one answer. The second answer is that the new district would be in exactly the same position as tens of other school districts around the state, which are going to be forced with the same issue if VHI goes out of business. And it's not just the district's issue, it's the association's issue. Lastly, I'd tell you that that's an issue between the board and those associations. I don't think it's something that the study committee ought to deal with. There's a couple of districts around the state that have had to address insurance issues over the past year relative to the exchange and to VHI, and they've had to do it mid-agreement, and those issues have been resolved. So I'm confident that this will not be an issue, but the obligation to roll the insurance, and i.e. the terms of the current master agreements forward, if you haven't negotiated something new, exists under state law. I mean, there's no choice about this in the language that's there. It's really mandatory.
Okay, other questions? Thumbs up, good to go with this article? All right. Number 6.
I brought that up.
Yeah.
My question was about the wording, because the object of the first part is not entirely clear, at least to me reading it. Perhaps something like, recognize the benefits to be gained from establishing district-wide curricula, as well as their obligation to do so. Because currently it's like the benefits to be gained from what?
Oh, is it just so it's not changing the substance, just making it
Just changing the wording.
so that.
Because this one had been edited between
Yeah.
the first articles meeting and last meeting, but we didn't get to talk about it last.
So can you read again how you think it should read?
What I believe it's trying to say is recognize the benefits to be gained from establishing district-wide curricula, as well as their obligation to do so.
Okay. And to otherwise standardize their operations.
I mean, I don't know if that should be part of the thing that's having benefits, but currently it's benefits to be gained from what was my question.
Any thoughts on that from council?
I think that's fine.
Okay.
So can you give the wording that we're going to be considering?
Ben, you want to read that back, or you got it? Recognize the benefits to be gained from establishing district-wide curricula and to otherwise standardize their operations on or before. Did you have more?
To retain the wording, just in a different order, I was saying, the forming districts of the Union District recognize the benefits to be gained from establishing district-wide curricula, as well as their obligation to do so, and to otherwise standardize their operations on or before July 1, 2017.
Okay.
Did you capture that?
Good to go with that language as suggested? All righty then. Article number 8. So, here's what we did in a brief version, and then we can get into discussion and so on. You had the original language that we've been looking at the last couple of weeks. And following discussion from last week, what was done was to maintain that original language and then to add additional language to deal with the high school facility in terms of ownership of that. And then there is an additional Article 8, so I'm looking at them as 8A and 8B, if you will. And the 8B is entitled Revised Version and New High School Provision. And that revised version has language different from the original. Thank you. You want to speak further to that?
So just, I'll be very brief. The purpose of the revised version is twofold. First, to address some of the concerns that were expressed about the original version, both in terms of how it might affect individual districts as well as concerns about capital improvements and repayment and things of that nature, and depreciation. So that was done. The language, while it's longer, I think is more simplified in the context of a sale. And then secondly, the revision also includes a new provision relating to the high school property. And as the note that went out with this draft indicated, part of the rationale for turning back school buildings, and in most of these reports, they've been turning back elementary school buildings for $1, is recognizing the role that elementary school buildings play in many communities. When you talk about Union High School districts, there's not one community that owns a Union High School district. This Union High School district is a little different than most. It only has 2 communities that are members. I think the average in the state is probably 4. But the basic belief is that when you're dealing with Union High School districts, they ought to have, the board ought to have the discretion to sell that property, whether it's selling it to one of the communities or whether it's selling it to another entity, but the board ought to have that discretion, and it ought to be treated differently than the elementary school properties and buildings that generally in smaller communities have more community ties. This approach is identical to the approach that was taken with your neighbor Chittenden East, recognizing Mount Mansfield and placing that in a unique category, but relative to the elementary school properties, providing a right of first refusal to those local elementary districts.
Questions or comments? Martha?
I like the revised version, 8B, better. It's missing a clause that I found problematic for our community, and that was the clause that said, and that it is in the best interest to sell the said building or property. This makes it clearer that it would be sold for $1. So I like.
You would support the second
I would
revision?
support the revised. And I also have a question. I know in Act 156, and I meant to research this and I didn't get to it. In Act 156, it says that a school can't be closed for the first 4 years. Does it say that in Act 46 as well?
It does not.
We've added some language in one of our
Oh,
attachments.
that's right.
So attachment B
Attachment B has that
has language that talks about no school closures. So even though it wouldn't be required under the Act
I
46.
knew I had seen it somewhere, but I
And-
couldn't see it here.
And that language is right out of Act 153 that was included in that attachment.
Keely?
I don't know if I even want to bring this up, because it isn't a big deal to me, and I just could foresee someone might ask this question, I'd like to be able to answer it. Does this about the high school mean that if the board decided that we didn't need the track or the skating facility, they could sell it to Skateland Incorporated instead of to the town of Essex or the village of Essex Junction?
It means that the Board of School Directors has the same discretion that it presently has under current law to sell that property to whomever they choose.
Okay, so there would be no change, would be a good answer.
Correct.
It's not a new.
So what, you know, relative to the elementary schools, you're placing, this language would place a restriction that presently doesn't exist under current law. So the high school, under this modified version, the high school would be able to operate, or the high school property would be treated the way the high school board can treat it today. We're placing restrictions on how the elementary properties can be treated.
Tom?
I feel like I'm missing something in the event, because there's two in the event. I don't see how that, or does that exclude the high school?
It doesn't need to, because you have a separate paragraph that addresses the high school. So when you're looking at the construction of an article, Tom, if you have a general statement and then you have a specific statement that relates to one district, you go by what's in the specific statement.
Brian, did you have?
Yeah, I think, don't you need voter approval to purchase property, but you don't need voter approval to dispose of it? A school board currently?
So you need voter approval to do both.
So all of this would still be contingent?
All of this would still be contingent on obtaining voter approval.
Would that, I would think that would help people swallow this if it was said that in this, upon voter approval. Otherwise, people get the feeling, well, they're gonna sell my school.
It's which
Could there be
voters?
one sentence
It's
added
which
at the
voters?
end?
And what Chris has got in here is it's pursuant to the statutes is the language,
Oh.
but it's not obvious to the average voter.
So I'd include the last paragraph in the original version about the sale being applicable to the provisions of state law. I would just resist being more specific than that, Tom, because I wouldn't want to place a restriction on the sale of the property that doesn't exist in state law. And so if the legislature in its wisdom makes a decision about how school property should be sold, I think that the district ought to be governed by those rules that the legislature sets.
But if you just included the.
And that could be covered in the preamble in terms of explaining that provision.
That's what I'm making that. So that in the preamble, you could do a greater explanation is that any sale of property is subject to voter approval.
And it's the voters of the entire Unified Union School District.
Correct.
So it would have to be an affirmative vote by all those voters.
Any other thoughts or comments on this particular article? Proposed article?
So given that Martha raised the suggestion around the second version of this, so the 8B, if you will, the revised version and the new high school provision, which would be this one here. How about thumbs up in support of that article as it's written?
Revised.
And revised.
And revised, yes, with the changes, okay? Good, good? 8B with revision. Thank you. Article 9. So, we have language in here now that addresses the proportionality And that's what we have right now. I suggested that this language stay for the purpose of this first review. We have additional language on the best and most current research about at-large representation. So, and we can get into that language if you would like to do that, or if you want to discuss the proportionality language as it's written in the document that you have here tonight to start with. So maybe the first piece, Brendan, would be just Article 9 as written, and maybe for starter purposes, thumbs up if you're comfortable with the proportionality, then we can determine if you want to go forward with the language around the at-large, and we can talk about those concepts. So proportionality. Okay, so we got 13 people. So let's have some more discussion, and this would be a good illustration of there are different opinions. So the one thing I just would encourage in terms of a little bit of a commercial announcement tonight, I just would encourage, you've been a terrific committee to work with, and I think that any of us that have worked with school boards over the years is an acknowledgement that there are important elements to board work. One is people having an opportunity to voice their opinion and to feel that their voices get heard. There's also the reality sometimes that votes get taken and then you may have an opinion that doesn't fly with the majority. And that's a no offense, that's just kind of the democratic process. The intent, the hope is that while your voice has been heard, you've had an opportunity to share your opinion, you might not have a majority of fellow members that agree with you. But once the vote is taken, what's always encouraged of boards is to say, I had my opportunity to express my opinion, I didn't win the day, but we're all going to go out of this with a united front. So I just would underscore that, as I think that's the best way for you to communicate with your public as well. So Chris has spent a good amount of time on this article, both doing the research and formulating language around this. We've had conversations with Brendan in the short period of time we've had since Thursday till tonight, and not to diminish the importance of this, because it's a little bit of a novel approach in Vermont. It would be somewhat of a novel approach in this region of the state, and it's different than what your community members are used to as well. So I'll let Chris speak to that article. Maybe wait for get one. And if there's any extras, if you could send them back up top.
Would you also like the extras from the earlier handout?
No, just, yeah, not necessary, just that last one.
Actually, if you could pass them up,
Oh, yeah.
because we were short one copy
Yeah,
here.
I'll go get them. We don't have to pass it
Yeah,
up.
I can
So Article 9, at-large voting. One of the first things I want to say is that there's a couple of different ways that this can be structured. And Brian and I, in conference with Brendan, made a decision to try to make this a little less complicated and to take one of those approaches rather than presenting the full variety of approaches that are available there. At the outset, let me tell you that this is probably one of the areas where the Vermont legislature has done the worst job in terms of identifying in our union school district statutes how to address this issue. There's no guidance whatsoever in the statutes, and in fact there are some contradictions relative to them. So the approach that's taken in this Article 9 is essentially to establish two categories of at-large school directors. And I use the term category rather than classes to somehow draw a distinction between the two. And the first is that in Category 1 you have 3 at-large school directors who are nominated from the 3 individual school districts of Essex Town, Essex Junction, and Westford. And those individuals have to have nominations from the community in which they reside, and you will elect 1 director from each of those 3 communities, but they will be elected by a vote of the entire union, not a vote of their individual communities. So they're nominated locally, they're elected at large. The purpose of this is to try to address one of the inconsistencies in Vermont law, which is in Title 16, in one part of the Union School District statutes, it says each community shall have at least 1 school director. It doesn't say that if you elect by your school directors at large, that you don't have to worry about that requirement. And so, there's a question, do you have to worry about it? So I made the decision to err on the side of caution and to establish these 2 different categories this way. So that's one. The second category is 6 at-large school directors who have to be a resident of one of the 3 districts, and they're nominated by filing a petition signed by voters from any of the 3 districts. And then those 6 directors are elected at large by the entire union, with 6 people receiving the highest number of vote totals being elected. Article 10, there wasn't very much discussion about Article 10 when we were looking at proportional representation, but Article 10 is, so what are the terms of these people when they're elected initially? And I erred on the side of saying that 2 of the 3 communities ought to have their Category 1 school directors ought to be elected for a 3-year term. So I arbitrarily made the decision to have Essex Town and Westford have directors that fit in that category. Essex Junction has a director, their director that they nominate has a 2-year term. Those can be varied however you want to do that. The other 6 school directors, the terms were varied there so that you have 3 school directors who have a 1-year term, 2 have a 2-year term, and 1 has a 3-year term, and that's so that you have an equal number of directors that have a 1-year term, a 3-year term, and a 2-year term across the board to do that. Marla had a question that Brian shared with me. So when does the term begin of these school directors and when does it end? There's a new paragraph that exists in both this alternate version as well as the draft report that you have that specifically clarifies when these terms begin, so that there's no ambiguity about that. I don't think that there would be if this paragraph didn't exist, but it clarifies it for anybody that wonders. And so the term begins the day the organizational meeting happens. So the voters say, yes, let's form this district. 30 to 40 days after that happens, there's going to be an organizational meeting, and at that organizational meeting, the school directors are sworn in. Prior to their being sworn in, there is no vested board of school directors that's able to make any decisions during that period of time. Once they're sworn in at that organizational meeting, their term begins, and the people that are elected for 1 year would serve until, from that day until the date of the district's 2nd annual meeting, which is probably going to be about a 15-month term. And the same is true for the people with the 2-year term. You can add 3 or 4 months to their 2-year term, and the same is true with the people that have the 3-year term. So there's essentially that period of time between the organizational meeting and when the voters make a decision about the date of the district's annual meeting in the future. that's gonna be added to the 1, 2, and 3-year terms. Article 11 is the nomination process for the directors, and it just establishes and restates in category 1, here's how those individuals obtain their nominations. It specifies that it's not no less than at least 30 voters in that district, or 1%. State law specifies that they're in category 2 for true at-large members, that they have to have at least 60 voters. So before I take any questions, let me share with you, I do have significant reservations about at-large voting. I have concerns about at-large voting in the context of this modified version, and the concerns are that you have no definition of what at-large means under state statute. And in the nomination section, under at-large directors, state statute talks about the potential candidate obtaining signatures from the voters of the necessary districts, not advisable districts. And so I think one of the complications is whether state law said that or not. If you have a situation where a district is formed and one of the forming districts says no, do you count the votes of the district that said no for the school directors? Because those votes can influence the election of other directors. So I ended up in this provision including one sentence that says that if Westford votes no to the merger, the vote totals from Westford for each candidate for school director shall not be counted in the final tabulation. My own view is that the legislature wanted to avoid this circumstance where people vote and then you take votes away from candidates. And that's why they have at-large voting in the nomination process only applying to necessary districts. It also, I think, has the issue where not only are you taking votes away, but you really don't necessarily know how voters would have voted in the context of if that other district wasn't present. How would their votes have actually occurred? So I think it's a very, for me, I have, as I said, serious reservations about it. The districts that I know of that vote at-large voting, it is a result of either a court decision ordering them to reapportion their board, and they came back with at-large voting. Or it's with districts that had disproportionate representation. At one point, CVU had each of the 4 towns having 3 school directors, and they had a choice at that point under the federal court order. They could have readjusted their school directors based on straight proportionality, which they did, or they could have done what another district did, which was to say, no, we'll take each of those 12 directors, and instead of 3 of them in the 4 communities being elected by their district, we'll have them elected at large. But I think it's typically been done for districts that are already established. So you're not dealing with the issue that I've been talking about for the last 4 minutes about what do you do with the votes from a district that says no.
Which in essence, you would only deal with it in the initial formation.
Correct.
I like it. The language is a little clunky, but you gotta do the lawyer thing. And you know, to me, it still shows community that we're really into this. and it's challenging. We're not willing to sit there and follow the same road everyone else does. We're going to put it out there, and I trust you to write the word so it goes through.
A lot of trucks. Marla?
Chris, at our last meeting, you mentioned that this, like if we do proportional voting, if down the road the board wants to propose this to the community, we can re-vote on this.
Absolutely. The change could be initiated one of two ways. Either voters could submit a petition to bring about the change, or the board could initiate it, but it would have to be approved by the voters of the district at that time.
Rachel?
I just see a lot of confusion around this. Basically what I'm saying is, even if we're interested in running for a position, do you run for the category 1 or the category 2? Do you then potentially lose excellent candidates for the board because they're in the wrong category? So I just think there's a lot of confusion here, and I really don't think that that's a way we want to get into the formation of the first board of a unified district in a very confusing situation, not only for people wanting to run, but for people voting. I just find it's very confusing.
I think Gary has this.
Gary, go ahead.
Yeah, I really like the idea of the at-large because it eliminates the us-them, which is kind of an underlying tone that I think we've heard a number of times, and it disturbs me. So I like it. There is actually a worse or a case scenario, if I can use the word worse, where in the 6 at-large candidates, even if you throw out the Westford votes, one of those candidates may be from Westford, in which case now you've got Essex Junction, Essex Town as the only participants in the union, but one of the board members is from Westford. That would be really awkward.
Cool.
But
No, they wouldn't be
have-
elected. I mean, they would not be elected because they're not a member of the district and they're not a resident of the district.
But they would have been elected. So you now have to get rid of that candidate.
Well, but it's the same issue. If you throw out the Westford votes, you may have an individual who was, quote, elected. And now when you pull back those votes, they're no longer elected.
Put wording in there that talks to that scenario, because the two situations are different.
Tom?
I'd like to go back to one of the things Marla said, that throughout this, we've tried to really be as open and inclusive towards Westford as we possibly can. And I think this adds a level of confusion that to an already very confusing, detailed project for voters. I just think I like the concept, and if we had been 10 years operating and people said, okay, now let's go to a at-large, it would make sense, because people would feel comfortable with it. But right now, it's going to be a challenge to make people understand what we're doing, and to have this included in it. I can just see people saying, how are we supposed to vote for this? I mean, that's my thought.
Keely and Kim.
I just want to go on record that I don't agree with the at-large. I like proportionality, and for the same reason as a lot of people are saying, the confusion. I think it's way too confusing for the beginning.
A couple of things. I agree with Mitchell that by trying to form a unified district, we're already trying to do something that isn't like everybody else in Vermont. So this is actually going to be simpler than, for me, as an Essex Junction resident, understanding who I'm voting for what school board in the current system. Because prudential, what does that mean? 246? What is that? CCSU, do I vote for that? I don't know, I never see it on my ballot. So this could be a lot more confusing. Also to agree with Gary that if we did use this, what do we do with the category 1 person elected from Westford? Because then we end up with an even number of people on the board. Do we add on, the 7th person who had category 2 also gets elected? So there's probably some tweaking that would need to go there. I'm getting the feeling that most people don't agree with me about at-large. So I would like to propose, could we consider a compromise option where 2 at-large candidates of the category 2 variety are added to the 9-member proportional board? That people from all 3 towns would get to vote on. This would allow people to get comfortable with what at-large means, and then if there was a vote later or a proposal by the board or citizens to change to at-large, people would know what it meant. They could stop thinking about censuses and redistricting and Westford going down to one of 18 people on the board.
Chris, do you have any thoughts on that idea of having the original proposal plus 2 at-large?
I think you'd have to increase the size of the board, because if you're going to have to, have
Right, I'm
proportional.
suggesting an 11-member board.
Yeah, if you're going to have proportional, you have to, that has to be proportional. So adding the at-large members would be, in addition to, and I think you move up to, an 11-member board, at that point. I think you still end up with the issue regarding the votes for those 2 at-large members in the initial election, that I identified at the outset. I think that still is an issue about what you do. I just throw out another idea, which I think you also have the ability, if the community wants to have this idea of at-large considered at a future point, is to take the original Article 9 and to include a paragraph that when the board in 2021 revisits proportionality after the 2020 census is out, that at that point the board shall consider whether or not to either move to at-large voting or to incorporate at-large voting. And I just throw that out because I think the mechanics of at-large voting are much easier once a district exists than they are in its initial formation. But
I just had a follow-up question.
Oh, sure.
I don't understand why people are talking about people becoming elected and then unelected when we vote for these people, and if the union doesn't get formed, then they're unelected. So obviously, first, there is a vote on which communities are joining a district, if any. And then the members of those committees votes are
No,
counted.
you're wrong. What happens is the same day that voters go
No, I
to the
know it
polls.
happens on the same day, but the people aren't elected until there's a district.
That's not what he's saying.
But their names are on the ballot.
Right.
So it's a screwed up process.
I mean, we're voting for potential directors
Yes.
of a board that doesn't exist.
Yes.
And they know.
So this is like no more or less potential than the other directors.
So I do think it's different, which is you're going to have, I mean, imagine right now, you elect your state representative, and people go to the polls and vote, and the day after that vote has occurred, people look at the results on another question and say, as a result of that other question, we need to back out all the votes that came from this community that were for each of the following individuals.
Well, but state representatives already exist.
Pick another analogy, Keely. The point is people going and voting to elect people, the results being tabulated, and then the results having to be modified by withdrawing votes that were cast.
Is
That's the
exactly
point.
what will happen if we don't form a district.
No.
No, it doesn't happen. If you don't form a district, the only thing that happens if first of all, if Essex Town or Essex Junction say no, then no one's been elected. You haven't changed any tabulations relative to whether individuals have been elected or not elected, the point is that there's no district. If on the other hand, Essex Town and Essex Junction vote yes, and Westford votes no, if you use proportional representation, then at that point, the voters who elected people in Westford, those individuals don't serve because the district decided not to join. If you use at-large voting and Westford has decided not to join, then I believe you have to adjust the vote totals for the other candidates and withdraw the Westford vote totals for those individuals and change the tabulations. And that's different.
But it's just arithmetic. Right, it's really
When do
nothing more
you
than doing a
tabulate the
subtraction.
second question?
Excuse me?
It's like, when do you tabulate the second question, before or after you tabulate the first question? Like, to me, it's,
So first of all, they're tabulated at the same time with the voting machine, so it occurs at the same time. It's not you tabulate the first one and then you go and you tabulate the second one. So the first question would be, and the second question would be tabulated at exactly the same time. And you'd
I
have
guess,
separate vote totals, and
philosophically,
you'd
the
have
second
separate
one
vote.
is conditional on the first.
Excuse me, and you'd have separate vote totals from each of the communities for those issues.
Yes, Linda?
Well, forgive me for being kind of thick, but why do you have to elect the directors before you've got a district? Why couldn't you get the district or not get it, and then have another election for directors?
It's required by state statute. It specifically says that you elect the directors on the same day.
On the same day, okay, somehow I missed that, I beg your pardon.
Marlon?
I just want to say, from lots of years and being there at the table, having to count votes the night of elections, you would have to draw all your civil board of authority or the people that come back in. You would not believe how long a process it is going to be to retabulate those votes. Then if you have disagreement, you have to retabulate them, and you have to have people standing there observing you, watching you do it. So you could get very expensive, and it could be very messy.
Brian, do you have your hand up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think, I'd be surprised if anyone doesn't share the outcome of feeling like one community. You know, so that we're all standing in that ground. I think there's a theory that at large is gonna make us feel more like a community. But we have a practice with the Union High School right now in which we have two separately incorporated communities that have one Union High School that vote proportionally. The representation does not divide itself geographically when the school directors do their work. I mean, we have a practical example that's been operating since the 90s, that we are one community in proportional voting. It's only a theory that the at-large is going to create that outcome. I mean, if it's the outcome we're looking for, we have a practical experience of doing it. If that's the outcome.
And this committee has reflected that same practicality. I mean, we're all pulling for all the communities. There's no.
Exactly.
I'd like to say something, not as the chair, but as a member of the committee. My feeling on this issue is that thinking ahead to phase 2 when we're out talking to the community, I would much rather be talking about the benefits of a unified union and talking about cost-benefit analysis and talking about aligned curriculums. And what I worry about is if we package at-large voting as part of this, suddenly I'm going to be in the position of having to sell at-large voting to the community, when my primary reason for being on this committee was to try to promote the idea, to find out if the idea of a unified union would be in the best interest of our communities and our school children. And so what worries me a little bit is that I worry that at-large voting, while in theory might be a great idea, it might take away and become the central arguing point for this phase 2 communication with the community. I think that what if we were to go forward with proportional voting, my guess is that in the not too very distant future, we would see at-large becoming the way that we vote for this elect. But we're not there yet. We're still in this separate place. Each of our communities are in this separate place. Under a unified union, I think 5, 7, 10 years from now, we would probably be all saying, well, geez, at-large voting makes total sense. We should do that. So that's just.
I think that with these articles, again, the board could come in, change them either way, whether we do a proportion or at large, whether we do partial at large. I do have an issue with proportion because of Westford. They are going to say something. Having come from a district that it's at large, I find that's the best way to go. But in this case, I say you could include me in your number 14, because at this point, I just think that maybe it's going to be complicated. And I think proportion would be the way to go right now. Not in the future. The way I would see it, I would hope that it does turn to be at large, because it would give everybody an even field, which is what I look for.
Linda.
Look, I sat here and I got confused about why we're doing it. You know, and I've been here every night. Keep it simple, you're right. If people are used to if proportional voting is the way the high school goes, and people are used to that, then let's go with it. And the board can change
either way.
Either way.
Other comments? Thank you, Linda. Yes, Marla.
Just on what Brian said about the Union High School proportionally, at the CCSU level, we have 3 representatives from Westford, 3 from Essex Junction, and 3 from the Union High School Board. And not once have I ever sat there and thought, I gotta vote the way my other 2 Essex Junction members do. As a matter of fact, I voted against them. So, and I know Martha, when she's there with 2 other board members, they haven't all voted together. We usually do our conscience and vote what we feel is in the best interest of the children. So I have no doubt that proportionally we can do this, and then I think maybe 7 to 10 years down the road, we'll be looking at large too.
Wait, Wes?
I'm questioning how we're gonna get out of here at 9 o'clock.
Yeah, thank you.
Good for you.
Thank you.
If that's what we're trying to do.
So let's revisit, and we'll look at the 3. I have the original proportionality as written, as what's in front of you, the at-large as described by Chris, and then the at-large suggestion of Keeley with 2 at-large, and maybe just go through that sequence. So thumbs up for the proportionality as written.
Was there a suggestion to add a sentence recommending that when the census occurs, at large be a consideration?
Is that considered a friendly amendment by everybody around the table?
So people, let's try that one in terms of the suggestion that there would be language added to that article, as Chris was suggesting, that could say that every 10 years the board has to look at the census to make sure that it's properly proportional. And you have 2 communities in particular that your populations are close enough that that's kind of an issue. But that is looked at with every census every 10 years. And Chris is suggesting when the board looks at that census information, it also shall give consideration to the at-large portion. Okay? People okay with that suggestion? Thumbs up? Okay. All right. So we'll have Chris add some language to that on the proportionality. Article 10. Thank you, Wes. Who's here, Ben? No. Oh, here it is. There you go. Article 10. And so there was additional language added to this. And this dealt with Chris's explanation about board members would be elected at the time of the vote on the Unified Union School District, the merger. And that length of term would run at least through the second annual meeting. Okay, so that was just a clarifier, and that's probably a good one, just so people understand their length of service.
A question on that?
Yes.
Would a person that's elected to a one-year term actually be up for re-election before the July 2017 start date?
What we're saying is that they would, yes, they would actually be up for election prior to the start of that, the district being fully operational.
Seems kind of odd to me. Maybe.
It does, it will be work that's done, and my guess, Gary, I like to believe common sense is gonna enter in. If the person said, this is nuts, I'm not doing this anymore, or I love the work, I'm gonna run again, and people are probably gonna be invested in that work, type of thing. But, yeah, there's a smack of illogic to it.
But they get full compensation.
That's good.
So Article 10, further questions? I think the big one was Article 9 with the proportionality. So Article 10, if people are good to go, thumbs up?
I actually have a question.
Yeah?
I'm sorry.
Sure. Okay, holding this up, Wes, I'm trying to move it along. No.
I only raise this because there is a mention of a date in the added language, and I just want to say, and I know, so I'm wondering if we can either hold on the date and get a thumbs up on Article 10 and then talk about the date in Article 11.
So whatever date you set in Article 11 will dictate what date's in Article
Okay,
10.
then I'm
People good with that?
Yes.
All right. Thumbs up on Article 10 then as written with the understanding about the date. Thank you very much. All right, Article 11. This we have looked at before. The issue was the date, and there was no magic to this. The November 3rd date was presented from a couple of perspectives. One in terms of moving this along and maintaining the level of attention to the topic and the discussion. That it allows for a second vote if there's a need for a second vote. Whether it's all of the districts or Westford as an advisable district if Westford happened to vote no. So I think everybody's aware that that's can be perceived as a bit of an ambitious schedule. And the other issue is what's the best time? You do have a vote that needs to take place by June 30th, 2016 to be eligible for the Act 46 5 years. So that's all I'll say. Keely.
From those of us who were at the communications meeting last night, it seemed like if our goal is to keep the conversation going, that is difficult to do in the summer. It's difficult to hold community engagement meetings in the summer. So while November is a great time to get people to vote because people expect to vote in November, we might not have had sufficient time before that to allow the community to feel that they really understood and had gotten input on what was going on.
Yeah, we talked about the fact that if November was the date, we would have to really be on the stick with community engagement sessions or public forums, maybe even that first week of school.
And it is the same timeline that Chittenden East did work with. A little bit different situation, but their timeline is similar.
Can Chris explain the process if we vote in November versus if we pick March or April? How long do you have, you've got to warn new articles, you've got to give it, 30 to 40 days, you've got to post it. So if you, let's say, my big concern is whether Westford can join so we get the added incentives. So if we pick March and April, let's say Westford's the only one that doesn't vote yes, is that going to give them enough turnaround to get another vote in there before June 30th, 2016.
The quick answer is yes. It doesn't provide any of the communities a significant amount of time to have any community dialogue between the votes. But it does, so the legal requirements, Marla, would be, the board really shouldn't warn a revote until 30 days have passed from the original vote. And then the earliest you could schedule a revote after that 30 days would be another 30 days. It couldn't be greater than 40 days from the date of the warning. So if you're talking about town meeting day, what you're really talking about on a practical level is probably the earliest that any of the communities could have a revote would be May 15th.
So you're not getting any time to further engage the community.
I think that's one of the disadvantages of a town meeting day vote. And you mentioned Westford. I think the other issue though is that if any of the other communities were to vote no, it doesn't allow much of an opportunity to say, hey, let's consider a revote on this issue.
You got your hand up.
I call myself.
Brendan.
So I think if Kim Gleason were here, she would say that she had checked in with Cheryl at the town clerk's office about the possibility of what the best date would be, and Cheryl implored Kim not to do it on town meeting day. Because when there's the primary election, and there's another election, and she was just worried about being able to actually logistically handle an event. So it's just a practical consideration I thought you should know about, that when we went to the town clerk and said what would be the best date, she recommended November as a better date. And also they're not, they're in a different facility right now, temporary facility. So they're also wrestling with just being not in their home at the moment. So I just thought that would be important to mention.
So the only other thing I'll mention is just this says November 3rd. That's because if you were holding a general election, that's the day it would be, but there's no magic to November 3rd this year. It could be any date in November from that perspective. So you could push it back a couple of weeks if you chose.
Judy do you have anything else to add to that? You had talked with the town administrator.
Right, I talked with Pat Scheidel, who's the town village manager, and he echoed the same sentiment that Brendan just shared. I think tapping into his political expertise, he was saying that it's good to have an election separate from all the other issues that are out there, and the presidential election and the complications of that, the budget season and all of the school budgets. He said, if you really want to galvanize people around this concept, that having it be a single vote with only this topic would be the most ideal, and that was his recommendation.
I'd like to propose that we push it back a week. It makes the timeline just a little less compressed. It's still a Tuesday early in November. So I think it's still a time that people wouldn't be surprised to be voting. But I am very concerned about the time that we have between when people will be back from summer vacations and when we have to have the morning. It's a very short time.
I seemed to recollect when somebody was talking about the town offices before that there was some week in November that was bad because of their move or something.
Okay. Yeah.
The 3rd and the 10th were both suggested timelines. So because the relocation effort from the town to back to the building after it's been renovated, Pat suggested maybe the earlier whichever of the two though will make it work. So I think that the 10th would be another feasible option.
You have a follow-up?
Just the other half of things would be that I understand that if we want people who are really focused on this issue to be making the decision, having a separate date is useful. But if we really want a vote of the largest proportion of the community possible, aligning it with the primary elections would make a lot of sense to me, because then more people will show up.
I hate this separate votes for every little thing. That's what we have now in Essex. Absolutely hate it. I live on the west side of Essex. I have to come all the way out to the town center, which is a distance further than driving to Winooski. It's just a real hassle, and a lot of times I just don't bother to vote because it's just too much to travel. One night, one vote, and because that'll get your biggest turnout when you do that. Not this, let's move the vote. If we can't get it together and hit the ground running the day after Labor Day when people come back from vacation, then we don't deserve to do this. But we should have enough time in those couple of months.
I have to agree. I think we should set up a couple of dates, either November 3rd, November 10th, and take a vote and move on. But, you know, the other thing is that we have the issue that Marla brought up. If we want to revote, we're not going to be, it's going to be cutting it very closely. I think we need to move while everything's on the table and just see what happens.
Any other comments? Marla?
I just want to remind people from work I've done in the community, you get into November, things shut down with parents and voters around Thanksgiving. People go away on vacation. They are so intent on Christmas and parties or whatever they celebrate. So you take that November 3rd period or November 10th, you don't do it then you're not going to be engaging the public at December or the end of November.
Can I make a suggestion that Article 11 and the date in Article 10 be November 10th as written? Thumbs up?
November 3rd.
I'm sorry, November 10th as the...
No, it's November 3rd.
Wait a minute.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, yeah. That, it
Say
would
it
be
again.
November 10th, I'm sorry.
November 10th.
Let me say that again. November 10th in that article for the voting date, and Articles 10 and 11. Thumbs up?
So you're changing the date as written.
Yes, I'm going with the 10th. That's what I was hearing. Yes. So let me see a hand, thumbs up again. All right.
I wonder what November 3rd will look like.
Nobody's gonna show.
But nobody's.
I mean, if you did a hand, a thumbs up.
Well, I'm going to do that now.
Oh,
All right.
because I'll change my vote.
Let me ask a question. Would people, let's just ask a question. November 3rd, thumbs up. Wait, back table, you good? How about November 3rd for the voting date? Thumbs up? Okay, we got more for November 10th right now.
I think just to clarify that none of the municipalities are holding an election on the 3rd.
Yeah, that's.
There's no election, so this is a
Correct.
special election in November.
Oh, I thought somebody said a primary.
No, that's town meeting
That's
day.
March, got it. I'm sorry.
So there's no polls set up, there's no voting at all in the community on the
Yeah.
first
So
Tuesday
you
in
wouldn't
November.
do, so the 10th would not be an additional vote.
Right.
It would be, it's going to be one of those 2 days. There's nothing else going on.
Can we revote that now?
Yeah,
Now that it's
we
voted?
vote,
Quick
please.
question. Which of those is the election day when people will be watching TV to see what's happening in other states?
Third.
November 3rd.
Which means you could get caught up a lot in that. But
People at least expect it to be election day.
But generally, because it's an odd year, it's not a big election year nationally.
And some states, lots of states don't do that first Tuesday in November, they do other dates.
because they're all the primary dates.
Sometimes it's a big
So why are we moving it out a week again? I don't.
Yeah, so we're gonna repose the question.
But let me- why do we wanna move it out a week?
That one.
Four times.
So,
To move it.
go ahead, you have another question?
Yeah, why are we moving it out a week?
Because there was a suggestion made and there were people responding with head nods. like
Is
they
a
like the
week
idea.
gonna really make a difference?
Well, I'm gonna ask that question, Mitch, right now. So for everybody in the room, here's the question. Does November 10th work for you for Articles 11 and Article 10? 14. Okay, Article 14. Article 12, was in the tentative approval, and there was some modification in the language that's in front of you, but that had tentative approval. People good to go with that?
Which one are we on? I'm sorry.
We're on Article 12.
12.
There were minor edits and changes from the meeting 2 weeks ago, based on feedback from conversation. And if there's no questions, I'm going to move on that was a tentative approval. And then Article 13 was also approved, so we're on to Article 14. And the change in Article 14 was to include language around CCSU operating up until no later than January 31st, where the school districts would do the close of business by December 31st, 2017. But what was added was to allow Chittenden Central to do that for an additional month, just to make sure all the business is taken care of. Ryan.
I'm just wondering, logistically, I would imagine some of the first actions of the board are going to be to hire a superintendent? Is that sequentially correct, Chris?
Yes.
Okay. And the board has to meet within 30 days of the vote?
Not exactly.
Okay.
And it's controlled more by the Department of Education, Agency of Education, Brian, when that happens.
So that whole idea about superintendent, CCSU, all that seems to work in your mind, the sequencing? Because it hurts my brain.
Well, if you abolish that, the problem is that if the districts that are part of CCSU go out of existence, then what's the superintendent in CCSU doing?
Yeah.
Because they're the superintendent of a SU that has no responsibilities.
This is basically to just let the books get closed.
It's to let the books get closed.
Okay.
Article 14. Thumbs up. Okay, good to go. Thank you. Article 16.
I have a question on 15.
Yep.
So where is the narrative? I guess what is that going to say?
That will be done and it will incorporate all of the bullets that are in this attachment. That's what we discussed last week. And
it'll be part of the final report that has to be authored after.
I mean, all those charts and stuff, because when that was presented, I mean, the only thing missing was a straw hat and the cane and the tap shoes. It just was not credible. It didn't make any sense to me.
What's that? What didn't make sense?
The how this is going to save us money. I mean, outside of the money we're getting back from the state, it didn't look like it was saving us money when you take that out. And I've asked this question all along. I brought this up saying I don't get this, and it was not really answered sufficiently.
yeah, I'm happy to give that another shot, Mitch. But unless you watched the videos from the meetings that you didn't attend.
No, it was the
Yeah.
meetings I was at. I heard it.
Well, there was
This
one
one
that
Brandy
followed
that
up,
followed that.
yeah, that you were not in attendance for, and I think that would have been more helpful. And I'd be happy to spend some time with you to go through some of that, because the two things that were the points of contention, which make some of your concerns absolutely legitimate. That when George Cormier presented the information, he basically froze all of the variables that could factor into having an impact on tax rate. And there was some sentiment that that's not realistic, that we should be working with those different variables. Well, if you take those 6 variables and work with each of the possible combinations, it would be it would put a lot of people to sleep very quickly. And it's all conjecture. What Grant and Roger did afterwards was to look at the actuals and apply those incentives based on the actual changes to the funding system over time that may or may not be replicated in the future. And what they did do was to show that there was not a great difference or disparity between those incentives and what you would have paid over that past 5-year period. That is what it is.
That was the Wednesday night meeting?
That was, and there was also some information that we shared, Mitch, in terms of the state analysis of the different changes in the tax rate, the base tax rate, the base amount. And there's a chart on that that if you don't have, we'll make sure that you get that. I'll be happy to walk through that further with you, because I'm not sure if everybody or most other people here have the same sentiment as, or feeling as strongly as you are.
I don't think they do, and I kind of feel, you know, Mitch, that the press is here for you to make such a strong statement. I mean, I don't feel the way you do, and I've been to every single meeting. I've been left early, and none of them. I've stayed for the duration of the meetings, and I'm not feeling like somebody's putting something over my eyes, like you are, and to make that
I saw the
statement-
chart, and when I read the
And to make that
chart.
statement when there's media here, I mean,
Could
I don't.
Could I speak to Mitchell's question?
Yeah.
Most of the charts that we've looked at have been in terms of the tax rate. If you look at the same information based on your home value, you'll see a real number that, while not particularly huge of a change, is still a change in the right direction. I think when I looked at an average home, it's something like at least $30 every time you pay your taxes. And like that, you know, is something when you think about every single person in our communities is getting that small benefit. Out of a huge budget, yeah, it does look like a tiny amount, but it's a tiny
Is that
amount in
with
the right direction.
with the incentives in or out?
With the incentives, it's suddenly a big
Okay.
difference in the right direction.
Okay, so what I saw didn't show that though, and that was the second meeting where the guy spoke in
Yeah,
the beginning.
I totally agree with you that the first presentation seemed overly optimistic and unrealistic, but Grant did a really good job of explaining a lot of things in, I think, 2 later meetings.
So I'm gonna operate, if I can, is at 15 we've got tentative approval on, understanding your issues. We talked a little bit last week about this would just be converted to a narrative, and we would put in the appropriate information to explain that cost-benefit analysis. But there was no objections from the committee as a whole about what was in here, and people have an option if you wanna add other things. But this would become part of the narrative, and the intent was to do it very similar to how Chittenden East did that. And we'll have enrollment information and so on incorporated in that, as well as in Article 16. Marla?
Did I hear you say that we're gonna have time to add to these?
Yeah, if you want, because there'll still be a final document that this group will see by July 20th.
I think the preamble's gonna be more important than this actually, because we can use terminology that people
Yes.
understand.
Right, the goal, so after tonight's meeting, you know, if the vote is affirmative, work will begin in earnest on the full report, which is due to the Agency of Education in July.
Our target date was August 1st to get it to AOE, so that you would have one more look at a final document by July 20th was the timeline that we had worked with. So between now and the 20th, based on the outcome of tonight, we would do that final report in draft, and so that you can see it before then, make sure everybody's good to go with that, and then that's what would be submitted to the Agency of Education. Okay? So Article 16 deals with the requirement to have information about the current grade configurations, both before and after the merger. And that was an attachment to your email last night that was entitled Attachment B. I did not bring additional copies of that tonight. And essentially what it says is, here are the current schools in Essex Town, Essex Junction, and Westford today. Here are going to be the current schools in Essex Junction, Essex Town, and Westford after the merger. There is language that speaks to this if you don't have it directly in front of you.
Isn't it on meeting 11?
What's that?
It's on meeting 11.
Oh, yeah.
I have a hard copy if anybody would like to see it, if they're missing one.
Yeah, I go to right.
There we go.
Oh, there we go.
This is why we have such a good committee. So these are the names of the schools. before and after, these are the grade levels, nothing has changed there. We've had some additional conversation based on some feedback from Martha with the capacity issues. Brand has worked up numbers for the Chittenden Central Schools in terms of capacity. Mark has provided numbers for the Essex Town schools. I have that information if that's of importance for you for the moment. And then in addition to that, there is language in, that deals with school choice in terms of school choice being available to all high school students currently, and that those school choice options could be expanded for K-8 kids based on action by the board. And probably the more important issue is this one that has come up in several conversations. No school closures are planned for the immediate future, and per the language in Act 153, no school closures are permitted in the first 4 years of operation unless the town of residence agrees to a closure. And that could also be included in your preamble.
My only concern about that last piece is specifically referencing Act 153, because if Westford joins, we're not going to be forming the new district under Act 153. We're going to be forming it under Act 46.
And Chris has addressed that with AOE, so let Chris talk to that.
So I think Martha's statement's correct. I don't think this has the language that I gave you, which is out of Act 153, but I think it's intended to stand independent of Act 153, Martha. So whether you form a unified district or not, that would become part of the articles. Whether it's exists in statute under Act 46, you're correct. But it would become part of the articles.
So no closures within the first 4
Within the
years.
first 4 years as part of the articles.
Brian.
Just a small thing, is there a reason why we've reverted back to Essex Junction High School? Is that?
Yes, there is. That was my, somewhere along the line, it had EJHS on the document that I was looking at, that's all.
No, I when I looked at it, I seriously wondered whether there was something about unraveling the Union District and all.
It's an education.
Nothing, yes, I'm
just replacing the current board.
Took me a month to stop saying CSSU.
Tiny
Jill.
point.
Yeah.
The attachment B that was attached to the email made reference to there being 5 elementary schools. This one fixes it and refers to 6, which it is. So we should use this one. It's a type. It was a type.
What do we have here, Mark?
Yeah, I thought we had 7.
I originally
I
had.
thought
yeah.
6.
Six elementary, one middle,
It's 6.
2 middle.
2 middles.
It
and
is
1
6,
high school.
yes, thank you very
6.
much.
Yeah.
And
I stopped counting after I started to talk about Essex Junction High School. My apologies. Go ahead.
In the frequently asked questions, we talk about the 10 schools, including CTE. Does that need to be reflected on this document? Do I need to take it out of the FAQ? What's its status?
You mean CTE, whether it should be included?
Right.
What's your sense there?
Well, it's part of the high school. I mean, you
Yeah.
certainly could refer to it separately. The enrollment is separate, so I don't think that's a problem if you wanted to refer to it separately, and it may help eliminate the question of people saying, well, what about CTE?
Right. Exactly.
So,
Okay with that as an add?
Friendly amendments?
Mike, I also had a question, where in the articles are we having the language about not closing a school in the first 4 years?
In this
The
attachment.
attachment is under this.
Article 16 would be this
Okay.
attachment. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Article 16, thumbs up with the additional language of adding CTE. All right. Article 17. Okay, so,
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
We haven't had our Linda Costello
yeah, break,
honorable
right?
memorial break. I can't get out of this room anyway.
I was just gonna encourage people that needed to take a break, go for it, but obviously that would be challenging.
How about thumbs up for a break? All right, we'll give you a 3-minute break.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Article 17 came about with just wanting to make sure that there was assurances around individual student circumstances and the needs of the district. Martha?
So I think we had talked about this exception that the board could do in the circumstance where parents agreed. So I thought maybe we could, in that yellow part, we could say the board of directors may adjust student enrollment with parental consent based upon individual student circumstances and needs of the district. Because I don't want to write a sentence that negates the whole premise of this, that your kids can stay in the school they're in. But I think we wanted the flexibility, if parents were okay with it, to give the board some room.
Oh, I see, right.
I agree with Martha that that reflects the concern of many of us when we discussed this before.
I agree as well.
Anybody disagree with adding that language?
Can you
Right.
say how it's gonna word again?
In the highlighted
So,
paragraph.
I would suggest in the yellowed portion, say, provided however, the Board of School Directors may adjust student enrollment with parental consent based upon individual student circumstances and needs of the district. So we talked about, it might make sense for, some kids to go to a different elementary school. But we didn't want in that first year to make that happen. But if the parents, if a few parents would agree to do that, and it made the staffing more rational, then we should allow that to happen. We shouldn't write something that made it so it couldn't, shouldn't.
Gary.
Did we get into an issue with the term parental consent? Because many parental groups are separated, divorced, or whatever, there can be conflicts, disagreements. I mean, do we open a can of worms? It's a legal question, really.
I think one parent, in Vermont, one parent gets to make the school decisions. I think that's right.
Is that true?
I think you're right. I think the phrase, you're right, the phrase has some baggage to it.
I think that's how.
But I think in the strict definition here, I'm not sure that it.
I just didn't want us to get us caught in a.
Can you use the word family?
So I just have, I do provided however, either upon parental consent or with parental consent of Board of School Directors. So I put the parental consent up front.
Fine.
And then
I
the
didn't know.
second thing I do is in the last sentence in that paragraph, the Board of School Directors will have, rather than the authority, I would just change the to full authority. So it's real clear that the board has the inherent authority after that date.
So how would the language read one more time?
So in the sentence that's in yellow, it would read, provided, however, with parental consent, the Board of School Directors, and it would continue. The next sentence would read, after July 1, 2018, the Board of School Directors will have full authority to adjust school attendance boundary lines and school configurations within this district.
So the parental consent is only before July 2018?
Correct.
Okay.
I just have a question about, would that assume, could be parent/guardian, or do you think guardians assume?
I think guardian derives from parent, it's whoever makes the educational
Okay,
decisions.
so that's, okay, just wanted to make sure.
Would it be a little, I don't know if the word's softer, to just say that setting school boundaries and school configurations will be done by the school board after July 1st, 2018. There's something about that full authority that is a little green.
Well, yeah, and I almost read that as if that after July 1st, actually that'll happen, is the way that I
Right.
sort of read, and worry that people will misinterpret
Mhm.
that.
Mhm. So if you just said that that was one of their responsibilities after.
Well, I think if you say it's one of their responsibilities, it also implies that it's going to occur. So I think if,
Why couldn't we leave it as is?
Which will have the
It's-
authority.
Yeah, we'll have the authority.
How important is full, Chris?
it's not critical. It's not critical. I mean, part of it comes with the modification or the further limitation that's occurred in the previous sentence.
It's two different families.
So I'm gonna suggest that we look at Article 17 with parental consent added to that line. Thumbs up? Okay. Article 18. Probably we've already done this.
You've done it.
All right, nice. Moving right along. Article 19. This is about Westford's reconsideration.
We're missing a word.
Mm-hmm.
Until, June 30th, 2016, to reconsider and join the union by voting in favor no later than June 30th, joining no later than June 30th, 2017. So again, by putting that June 30th, 2016 date in, if Westford were to vote no initially, have a revote and vote yes, then you all benefit from the Act 46 5 years of incentives. If Westford votes no, you're planning on a red, and if Westford has a second vote and votes no, then you have a red form. And then, and I think that this would be part of your preamble explanation is, so what becomes of Westford? And I think that that would just have to be explained. And what becomes of Westford is that Westford would then be likely reassigned to a supervisory union, because your supervisory union no longer exists. So they could be assigned to a supervisory union in Franklin County. Or they could be approved by the State Board of Education as a single district, which would be another possibility. I'm not sure that would be likely in this environment. Chris, other thoughts on that?
No, not really.
But it would not be assigned to our unified district.
Yes, that's the understanding. Because as you become a unified union district, then you're not going to continue as a supervisory union. And this was one of the issues 7 years ago when this discussion came, because it could have resulted in the junction of the town forming a unified district, and Westford staying within the supervisory union, so you still had the Chittenden Central Supervisory Union with 2 districts and a third board for the supervisory union. That would not happen under this Keeley.
As this process is going on around the state, is it possible for our new unified district to randomly get assigned like some random other district to it that we don't anticipate, or is that only supervisory unions that can have that?
You want to respond to that? Because I think that the
Only and I don't want to confuse the issue. Under current law, everything that exists as of tomorrow Under current law, the answer is, there is no circumstance that that could occur. The legislature can always change the rules of the game, but they have essentially done probably the most major restructuring in the last 35 to 50 years. They just finished doing it, and I think it's unlikely that they would be revisiting this issue anytime in the next 10 years in the context of requiring that a unified union be either assigned to another district or that a unified union has districts assigned to it. Those scenarios are really excluded from Act 46.
Chris, if I may, I'm confused by this June 30th, 2017. It says by voting in favor no later than June 30th, 2017. I thought the vote had to be by June 30th, 2016 in order to get the enhanced incentives. There's something not right about the voting here, I think.
It's the voting date.
It's the voting date.
2016.
It's the voting date.
And that they're gonna join no later than June 30th, 2017.
So the first date is the vote, the second date is the join.
So you can change the second date, Martha, as long as it's after June 30th, 2016.
Well, I read that as saying that you vote by June 30th, 2017.
That's
And-
correct.
No, you have to vote by June 30th, 2016. You have to be in the district, you have to agree to be in the district
By June
on
30th,
June 30th, 2017.
But that's a
But
regional.
you have to vote to it by
By
June 30th.
2016.
It's a
Right.
wording.
It's a wording issue,
Yeah.
it's not the concept issue.
Like something like, by voting in favor of a merger to occur no later than June
No.
30th, 2017. Because currently it could be the voting in favor that is no later than June 30th, 2017 in that clause.
Union. We say joining the unified
Voting in
union.
favor of joining.
Well, but
Yes.
it's not clear whether the voting or the joining is
But it-
modified
it
by the
should
no
say
later than
vote to
June
join.
30th.
The word vote should be in relating to
How about if you say,
How about-
you have to vote by June 30th, 2016, and it has to be effective by June 30th, 2017?
You could do that. You could also just have it read, in the event that the Westford School District votes not to join the Union District, it will have until June 30th, 2016 to reconsider and join the Union District, with admission granted in advance by the Union District.
Good.
Yeah.
I like that. That works.
Article 19.
Can you just read that one more time, please?
Yes.
Thank you, Ben.
So Ben, it says, in the event that the Westford School District votes not to join the Union District, it will have until June 30th, 2016 to reconsider and join the Union District, period. And then you're eliminating the next, or not period, you're eliminating the next statement until with admission granted in advance by the Union District.
So take out the clause by voting through the date.
This would be Xed out here.
Got it? Great.
Okay, Article 19, thumbs up. Okay, good. Article 20, we've come full circle.
Back to the meeting. Stickiest issue of all. Yes, Linda?
Isn't it possible, would it be possible for us to say, leave out the Westford District here and say that the Unified Union District will be named by a vote of, or agreement of the member community, of the members of this community union? I don't know how to say it lawyer-like. But, why can't once we've agreed to form a union, why can't the members of the union decide what it's gonna be called? And just say that.
That's good.
Lawyer-like person?
I would tell you it has to have some name in these articles and has to have some name upon being formed. It could be, Linda, it could be Unified District Number 2, or it could be Unified District Number 5.
We could be number 1.
We can number one.
I know that.
Take it.
It could be that, Linda.
That would be simple, and then people don't get their backs up about who's joining with who or who likes who. And if we can get it through, then then they can fight it out.
How about Community Union District, or CUD, which would include.
Just don't vote over dinner.
I'll vote for that.
Only if we're wrong. I don't know where to go with it.
Chew on that for a while.
The other alternative that was suggested over here during one of the breaks, the break, was that we could go with the name as is, but appoint a subcommittee to come up with a better name before we submit the report, the final report to the agency. So that would be another option. A group of this committee could work specifically on that. Yes, Marla?
When we vote on whether to agree as a committee to these articles, could we make that part of a motion?
Make what part of the motion?
That we will approve these articles of agreement
Yeah.
as amended.
So what would we call ourselves?
What number?
Unified Union District Number 1. Well, it's
Got
already
it.
taken.
At this point, for purposes of approving the articles, I would leave it blank and it'll be filled in after consultation with the AOE. And would be completed, at the time the final report is filed with the state.
So are we still talking about the idea, is the committee open to the idea of a subcommittee of this group working on the name and making that recommendation prior to submitting the final report?
Well, I mean, Essex Westford works if everyone's involved in it. At least tells everyone where it is. So I mean, I don't like just leaving stuff on the table and then walking away from it, and that's what I hear here.
So how many people do not like the idea of leaving it Westford, Essex Westford?
Do not like
Do
leaving?
not like it.
Until that's settled, it's confusing.
So let me do this again. So Essex Westford as the name, the Essex Westford Unified Union School District. Let me just do a thumbs up with that and let's go from there. So thumbs up on that name, Essex Westford Unified Union School District. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you got kind of a split.
How about thumbs up on the committee?
Say it again?
How about thumbs up on the subcommittee?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, okay, so we'll complete all of the final write-ups here on the amendments and so on, but that we establish a subcommittee to come up with a name to present to the committee the next time we meet. Thumbs up.
Are we meeting again before submitting to the AOE?
We have July 20th as a final document. We don't have to meet because all of that can be done electronically and communicated to people if people want, and July is always a funky time to get people together again. So let me rephrase it, that there's a subcommittee established that would suggest a name for the Unified Union School District. Thumbs up. Okay. So for the moment, we'll operate with it's a UUD.
Not a CUD.
Not a CUD. So, you ready for the question, Mr. Chair?
I think we're ready for the question.
So the question then is, understanding that we've got it right because we're relying heavily on Ben Dickey for his copious notes as well.
Heavy burden.
And those of you who also take good copious notes to make sure that those are correct when we see them. But, so here's the question. For those in favor of supporting the Articles of Agreement as amended tonight, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Should we do that by Robert's rules?
What?
Should we do that by Robert's rules?
Australia style? I think you should.
Should we have
I think you
somebody
should, yeah.
make a motion, second it?
Good.
So
You have the
I'll
chair.
make the motion that we approve the Articles of Agreement as amended.
I'll second.
Martha seconds. Is there any other discussion?
I have a question.
Yes.
Because the minutes are what are going to make this official, we will need to get back together as a committee to vote on these minutes from tonight.
Good point. We vote electronically?
So we'll have to figure that out logistically.
Okay, because they aren't official until we vote on them.
Correct. And technically, those need to be in play and available after 5 days by statute. So we'll get those done, get those out to people, and with a copy of the amended language so that that's available for everybody. And then what we can do is work with people in terms of we'll send out information about what some possible dates would be, and as long as we can get a quorum, and if people have any major reservations, you can express those. You've been great in terms of making sure. I think the feedback that Brendan's been getting, I've been getting recently, it's been extremely helpful. So I don't sense that anybody's got reservations about voicing any concerns if you couldn't be if we needed. But that would be intended to approve the minutes and finalize a name potentially.
Spoken like a true board member.
Well, see, that's why you got some of us here.
Great, thank you for bringing that up, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So, we have a motion, we have a second, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes.
10 minutes early.
I would just like to take a moment to thank you, Brendan, for your leadership and your continued leadership in the future. Brian, for your fabulous work, just for your fabulous work. We couldn't have done what we've done without you, and I think all of us appreciate it. And to Judy and Mark and their staffs, for all the information they provided us. I just want to say great big thank you.
It's been an honor to work with all of you, and it's been an honor to serve as your chair. I want to thank all of you for your amazing work. We will have an opportunity to get together again, and we will have lots of work ahead of us as we get into phase 2. And I have asked all of you if you'd like to be involved in that, and so thank you for letting me know. This is an exciting time, and I want to thank all of you for being a part of it. So, thanks.
Yeah, and I would just add in terms of kind of going into tonight and thinking about this, I just really appreciate and value how you have worked together. And I think it just speaks volumes for where you are headed with this. This is a very significant forward step for communities your size in terms of looking at merging for all the right reasons. And you know, I harken back a little bit to the slides Mark presented last week in terms of those key elements that are the advantages of where you're trying to go with this. And you know, I think throughout this process, none of you have lost sight, and I've shared this with Brendan several times, is that the good news about this committee is that you've been so student-centered. You've really been about the kids, and the rest of the details going to come into play. But you have successful school systems because you have communities who value the educational program. And I think if there was anything that was most telling about this whole process was reading the motivations that you wrote in terms of really how heartfelt this is. So when you may encounter over the next few months that people forget that you're neighbors and residents and parents, and that you're not a bunch of bureaucrats that have been kind of hiding out here, that will be the challenge. You've got some heavy lifting to do going forward, but the fact that you're walking out of here as basically a 20-0 vote in support of this is going to be a very significant statement to your public that you have spent hours and hours at meetings and well-attended meetings and doing a lot of homework. And I think you've had great leadership with Brendan. I can't underscore that. And I just want to thank you for that. There's a bit of an emotional element to me because this is my last hurrah. I'm leaving Vermont basically in 15 days to become a Virginian. And 42 years into my career, and I am officially retired as of midnight tonight. So while Judy grows concerned that I'm not going to be available to lend additional assistance, I am committed to doing that. I also need to make sure I get all the boxes packed properly.
Always hold a meeting.
Yeah, there you go. But give me a heads up because I need to let my wife know so she won't be there. But I just have to say, I came into tonight really looking forward to the outcome and feeling positive about where you're going to be, and you've delivered in spades. But to me, it's a nice finish. So personally, for me, I really appreciate it. The investment of your energy and your thought time and all of those things that you're not enjoying by being at meetings until 9 o'clock without breaks. So, thank you very much.
Marla?
I want to echo what Martha said. This committee could not have functioned as smoothly as it did without the cooperation of Brendan and Brian and your patience, because when we were information gathering, I think Martha and I, and there's a couple others, Keely, I can name us, I think we probably drove you ready to go home and say, I'm not coming back again. But also, I gotta give kudos to Mark and Judy and their staff. No one has mentioned if there's any staffing eliminations, it's gonna be in their administrations. And not one of their staff members stood up here worried about their job. They talked about the student and put the student in the center. So it's kudos to you folks.
The only other piece I would add is Chris has been invaluable about an issue that has grown in complexity with the absolute opposite of answers being available. So, he's done well with that. So.
Great. Well, with that, I think our meeting is adjourned.